On the evening of June 15, 2020, hundreds of Indians and Chinese troops laid aside their arms and took on each other in a brawl on the ridge of a mountain in Ladakh, a desolate high-altitude plateau in the northeast Kashmir. The clashes, in which clubs and stones were used, left a bloody trail of dead and wounded soldiers on a frontier that had not seen such a violence in the last 45 years. India lost 20 soldiers from the fight, but it's unclear how many Chinese soldiers died from the clash because China refused to talk about it. 2 weeks after this altercation, the Indian government banned 59 Chinese mobile apps, including top social media platforms such as TikTok, Hello, WeChat, Club Factory, the popular game Clash of Kings, CamScanner, Zenda, and others to counter the threat posed by these applications to the country's sovereignty and security. TikTok has a lot to lose in the world's second most populous country. India has been the biggest driver of new TikTok downloads. The app has recently exploded in popularity around the world. It was downloaded 315 million times from January through March 2020, an amount that tops any other app ever for a single quarter. TikTok has more than 2 billion downloads overall, more than doubling its total from a year ago, but losing India could have a knock-on effect for TikTok's brand, which is already suffering in the face of increased scrutiny from US lawmakers thanks to its Chinese roots. For more than a decade, China has limited how foreign tech firms operate in its territory. China, which has the world's largest internet market, has used its Great Firewall to block Facebook, Twitter, Google, and other services in the name of preserving its cyber sovereignty. This system has helped homegrown giants like Tencent and Alibaba Group with the local market, while giving the Chinese government a better hold on what gets communicated on these platforms. China has even suggested that other nations deploy similar measures. But you have to be careful what you wish for, because now dozens of Chinese firms got a front seat view to the challenges their global counterparts like Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter face in their territory after the Indian ban. Other nations are also considering following in the footsteps of India and also banning TikTok. President Donald Trump and US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have hinted that the US government is looking at potentially banning TikTok. Australia has also hinted at the possibility of banning TikTok. India and China have a long history of bad blood when it comes to border disputes. What happened on the 15th of June has a long history of more than 50 years. The conflict stretches back to at least 1914, when representatives from Britain, the Republic of China, and Tibet gathered in Simla in what is now known as India to negotiate a treaty that would determine the status of Tibet and effectively settle the borders between China and British India. The Chinese, balking at proposed terms that would have allowed Tibet to be autonomous and remain under Chinese control, refused to sign the deal. But Britain and Tibet signed a treaty establishing what would be called the McMahon Line, named after a British colonial official, Henry McMahon, who proposed the border. India maintains that the McMahon Line, a 550-mile frontier that extends through the Himalayas, is the official legal border between China and India. But China has never accepted it. In 1947, India declared its independence from Britain. 2 years later, the Chinese revolutionary Mao Zedong proclaimed an end to its country's communist revolution and founded the People's Republic of China. Almost immediately, the two countries, now the world's most populous, found themselves at odds over the border. Tensions rose throughout the 1950s. The Chinese insisted that Tibet was never independent and could not have signed the treaty creating an international border. There were several failed attempts at peaceful negotiation. China sought to control critical roadways near its western frontier in Xinjiang, while India and its western allies saw any attempts at Chinese incursion as part of a wider plot to export Maoist-style communism across the region. By 1962, war had broken out. Chinese troops crossed the McMahon Line and took up positions deep in Indian territory, capturing mountain passes and towns. The war lasted 1 month but resulted in more than 1,000 Indian deaths and 3,000 Indians taken as prisoners. The Chinese military suffered fewer than 800 deaths. By November, Premier Zhou Enlai of China declared a ceasefire, unofficially redrawing the border near where Chinese troops had conquered territory. It was the so-called line of actual control. Tensions came to a head again in 1967 along two mountain passes, Natula and Chola, that connected Sikkim, then a kingdom and a protectorate of India, and China's Tibet Autonomous Region. A scuffle broke out when Indian troops began laying barbed wire along what they recognized as the border. The scuffle soon escalated when a Chinese military unit began firing artillery shells at the Indians. In the ensuing conflicts, more than 150 Indians and 340 Chinese were killed. The clashes in September and October 1967 in those passes would later be considered the second all-out war between China and India. But India prevailed, destroying Chinese fortifications in Natula and pushing them further back into their territory near Chaula. The change in positions, however, meant that China and India had different conflicting ideas about the location of the line of actual control. Standoff between the armies began in early May when large contingents of Chinese soldiers entered deep inside Indian-controlled territory at 3 places in Ladakh. Chinese troops breached the line to set up temporary structures in the Galwan Valley even after military officials reached an agreement on June 6 to de-escalate. The problem arose when an Indian patrol visited the area near a reach to verify a Chinese assertion that its troops had moved back from the line of actual control. The Chinese troops had thinned out, leaving behind 2 tents and small observation posts, which the Indian party demolished. A large group of Chinese soldiers arrived and confronted the Indian soldiers. It was not clear what happened next, but the two sides soon clashed. The Chinese soldiers were reportedly using iron rods and batons with spikes, killing 20 Indian soldiers and wounding dozens of others. Soldiers on both sides are not allowed to carry guns at the border. These are the main issues that happened that got the Indian government provoked. And up until this point, there is still no definite boundary between the two nations at the border. India lags far behind China in military and economic power, leaving it with few options. But Chinese telecommunications and social networking companies have long eyed India's giant market and its enormous potential. About 50% of India's 1.3 billion citizens are online. The Chinese apps were stealing and surreptitiously transmitting users' data in an unauthorized manner to servers which have locations outside India, according to India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Cybersecurity analysts have warned in the past about the risks Chinese apps and telecom companies may pose, citing the country's national intelligence law. The law holds Chinese companies legally responsible for providing access, cooperation, or support for Chinese intelligence gathering. The same argument has been at the center of a campaign to persuade Western countries not to allow Chinese companies like Huawei and ZTE to build their next-generation 5G wireless networks, citing national security concerns. After a 2017 clash between India and China's militaries over another border dispute, Indian troops were forced to delete dozens of Chinese apps from their phones over national security concerns. The Indian government also has had a long-standing worries that Chinese companies are dominating local markets and are beating out Indian app developers. There are many Indian short video apps available on Google Play Store and Apple App Store, including Chingaria, Bolo India, Roposo, Metron, among others. But most users prefer ByteDance's TikTok. India also has national security concerns about what China does with the data it collects. TikTok has your children's home address, Face app has your photo and the ability to predict what you look like over the course of your life. Your hotel check-in app shows your travel destinations, room, preferences, and upcoming stays. This might not seem like a big deal, but all of this data could be used against you through geotagging, facial recognition, and pattern projection. Some foreign nations, such as Saudi Arabia, use information shared across apps to identify dissidents and potential spies or hack into computers. Additionally, the data collected through apps can be used to create psychographic models, grouping of people based on their shared psychological characteristics that are deployed in disinformation campaigns. These are some of the fears and concerns Western countries and others have towards TikTok. Given China's history of data interference and its faulty human rights record, America and its allies are concerned about data weaponization. Researchers found that the TikTok iPhone app is spying on its users by currently reading the clipboard. The vulnerability resulting from the fact that iOS and iPad OS have unrestricted access to system-wide general pasteboard means that a user's precise location may be made available to an app if they simply copy and paste the photo. This meant TikTok was able to access iPhone users' clipboards without their permission, essentially meaning TikTok could read any text the user has copied. The researchers noted that this could be as mundane as shopping lists or more serious data like passwords or financial information that could lead to a potential hack of the user's bank accounts. Talal Hachbekri and Tommy Misk discovered this issue when investigating the beta version of iOS 14, which comes with more granular privacy and security settings. The upcoming version of the OS will notify users if an app or widget pastes text from the clipboard. Earlier this year, the same researchers found that TikTok was found to be copying clipboard data on Android devices, which the developers ByteDance blamed on the use of an outdated Google advertising SDK and promised to change. Looking at how fast TikTok has grown in just 3 to 4 years makes you ponder if the West and its allies are becoming afraid of the Chinese company's fast growth as a threat to their own local tech firms. Mark Zuckerberg has already made it clear he has no love for TikTok, but we now have an even clearer look at just why he's so concerned about the Chinese rival. In short, the app is growing like crazy even by Facebook standards. TikTok's 2019 installs represent 44% of more than 1.6 billion downloads that the app has had to date. Of course, not everyone who downloads the app will go to become an active user, but the numbers do tell the story of an app experiencing meteoric growth, especially in China, where Facebook isn't allowed to operate. China, where the app is known as Douyin, was ByteDance's second largest market after the US. In October 2019, Mark Zuckerberg made some statements concerning the rise of Chinese companies, particularly TikTok. From the statement, it was obvious that the Facebook CEO was feeling threatened by Chinese rivals. TikTok represents a new form of social entertainment that's vastly different from the live logging of Instagram, where you can just take a selfie, show something pretty, or pan around what you're up to. TikToks are premeditated, storyboarded, and vastly different than the haphazard stories on Instagram. Facebook's copycat Lasso has been installed just 425,000 times since its launch in November 2019, while TikTok has had 640 million installs in the same period outside of China. And just in case you forgot, TikTok has more than 1.4 billion total installs beyond China to date. But while TikToks might look like stories because they are vertical videos and TikTok might algorithmically recommend them to people like Instagram Explore, it's a whole nother beast of a product and one that may be harder than it seems to copy. To crystallize why, let's rewind to Snapchat. With the launch of Stories, it started to blow up with US teens. Facebook's attempts to clone it in standalone apps like Poke and Slingshot never gained traction. In fact, none of Facebook's standalone apps have succeeded unless they splintered off an already popular piece of Facebook. It wasn't until Mark Zuckerberg stuck his clone of Stories front and center atop Instagram and Facebook that Snapchat users' count went from growing 18% per quarter to shrinking. But Facebook was fortunate enough because Stories really wasn't that dissimilar to the content users were already sharing on Instagram. Tiny biographical snippets of their lives. Snapchat CEO Ivan Spiegel had originally invented Stories as a vision of Facebook's newsfeed. All users had to know was, I take the same videos, but shorter and sillier, post more often, and then they disappear. The concept of Instagram didn't have to change. They were still about telling friends what you were up to. The Facebook strategy usually is, they offer to buy you off. If you refuse to sell, just like in the case of Snapchat, then they are going to copy everything that you have developed in your app and embed it into their own apps. But you see, in the case of TikTok, this strategy has not worked. Facebook have tried to copy TikTok from all directions and nothing has worked, and this is really frustrating for Mark Zuckerberg. The privacy policy of TikTok in comparison with the privacy policies of Facebook and Instagram are not that different from each other. Basically, they are saying that they are using your usage data, behavior data, preferences, friends, contacts to provide you with their service, to customize the service, and of course to do targeted advertising. This is exactly what Facebook is doing and Instagram is doing too, and TikTok is no different. But one thing is for sure, nobody has been able to give a solid evidence of TikTok spying, just like in the case of Huawei and ZTE. But owing to the fact that TikTok has its origin from China, it makes people uncomfortable. A lot of people are beginning to uninstall TikTok right now because nobody wants their information or personal data to end up somewhere that they don't know, and which might lead to damages later on.